1907 Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. The examination board is examining the drawings before them, the routine tasks of an ordinary hand. The jury didn't give it much thought. They drafted the dismissal order and moved on to the next case. It took them less than 5 minutes to reach a decision. The decision they made in those 5 minutes would change the course of history, because the name they rejected was Adolf Hitler. And that letter of rejection would lead to the deaths of 6 million people. There was no way for them to have realized this, but I can't help but ask, how can such a fleeting moment pave the way for such a terrible disaster? How can the breaking of a single person bathe continents in blood? And most importantly, has this turning point really been understood, or are we still comforting ourselves by classifying Hitler as a monster? This second option is far more dangerous. Because this isn't the story of some extraordinary monster, it's the story of an ordinary person, an ordinary town, and an ordinary silence. And that's exactly why you need to watch this video right to the end. But before we begin, on this channel, we explore the dark corners of history. You can support the channel by subscribing. Let us know in the comments which forgotten, suppressed, or misrepresented stories you're curious about. Now let's look at the truth, because school textbooks skip over this part. In the corridor of a homeless shelter stood a 19-year-old youth. He wore a worn-out coat, held broken pencils in his hand, and had a stack of rejected drawings by his side. This young man was Adolf Hitler. He had come to the big city with the dream of becoming a painter, but the academy had rejected him twice. They told him his drawings were inadequate, and Hitler could not accept this. And it was at this point that history's most dangerous psychological mechanism came into play. Refusing to accept that his failure lay with himself, Hitler sought someone to blame. In Vienna, he was ready to present that scapegoat. At the beginning of the 20th century, the city was a cauldron of turmoil. Nationalists, racists, socialists, and imperialists sat in the same cafes, yet they did not see the same world. Newsagents were filled with leaflets claiming that Jews controlled the banks, the press, and commerce. The superiority of the Aryan race had become a respectable topic of conversation in cafes. Racism in Vienna was not an aberration, it was the norm. And the city's mayor, Karl Lueger, had turned this sense of normality into a political weapon. Lueger was a clever and charismatic populist, but he kept this a secret from everyone. When he took to the podium, he would blame the Jews, the crowds would give him a standing ovation, and he would win the elections. Hitler watched him. He took notes and figured it all out. He realized that words had a more powerful effect than a sword, and he understood that when crowds found someone to blame, they stopped questioning. A penniless, homeless young man, lost and directionless, absorbed the ideological poison seeping from his surroundings. He eked out a living by selling hand-painted postcards, days of hunger, nights of cold, but he was no longer empty inside. He was filled with a rage directed at others, with that dangerous sense of satiety. When his dream of becoming an artist died, fanaticism took its place. This transformation did not happen overnight. It took years. It built up drop by drop, and no one noticed until this accumulation had reached a point from which the world could never be restored to its former state. When the calendar showed June 1914, a bullet was fired in Sarajevo and set Europe ablaze. Hitler saw this war as a salvation. At last, he had the chance to serve a purpose and would have a place to belong. Although he was Austrian, he enlisted in the German army. He served as a courier at the front. He was wounded. He was decorated. He survived. But when the guns fell silent in 1918, something inside him shattered. Germany was defeated, but the soldiers on the front lines were still holding on. It didn't feel like a military defeat. It had to be something else, an internal betrayal. And so the legend of stab in the back was born. There was no evidence. But why look for evidence? This theory fits so well with both its own disappointment and the wounds of millions of Germans that its untrue nature didn't diminish its importance. Defeat was painful, but finding an internal enemy as the cause of defeat turned the pain into anger, and anger was far more bearable than pain. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, brought Germany to its knees both economically and psychologically. Territorial losses, astronomical war reparations, and public humiliation. Inflation reached such a point that families were burning banknotes in stoves because the calorific value of paper money exceeded its purchasing power. The number of people waiting in bread lines had long surpassed the number of those who harbored hope for the future. and it was in this darkness that Hitler began to speak. In 1919, in Munich, Germany, in a small, dirty, unknown meeting room, a man stood up. He had no official title, he was not a well-known name, but those who heard his voice never forgot it for the rest of their lives. It was rhythmic, angry, and hypnotic. His accusation was crystal clear: Jews, communists, traitors, and what he promised: greatness, power, and honor. No one took him seriously, but this went down in history as one of the most costly mistakes. In 1925, he wrote Mein Kampf. This book was not an ideological manifesto, but a document of hatred. He explicitly wrote that Jews should be exterminated and that Germany should make conquests under the guise of living space. He didn't hide anything and didn't use encryption. He wrote it in a way that everyone could read. No one was alarmed. No one said, "Stop." In 1929, the Great Depression came. Factories closed, banks collapsed, hunger spread from city to city, and Hitler built a promise on the very foundation of that collapse: order, jobs, and German pride. In 1933, he became Chancellor, and from that moment on, hatred ceased to be mere rhetoric and became law. The law's initial steps were small, seemingly innocent. Jews couldn't be civil servants, they couldn't marry Germans, they couldn't enter certain businesses. Then, they couldn't go to parks, and they couldn't own radios, because each restriction, taken individually, seemed understandable, but together, they were gradually depriving a people of their human rights. Dehumanization is the oldest genocidal technique in history. Because a human being cannot kill a being they perceive as human, first, they must be stripped of their humanity. First their name is taken, then their face, then their voice. November 1938, the night of broken glass. In one night, 7,500 Jewish businesses were destroyed, 1,400 synagogues were set on fire, and approximately 100 people were killed, and 30,000 were sent to concentration camps. Germany woke up in the morning to a pile of broken glass and walked on the broken glass in the streets. Without asking, without questioning, because asking was dangerous now. From 1942 onwards, 6 extermination camps were established in occupied Poland: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, and Majdanek. These were not labor camps, they were death factories. The iron inscription on the gate read, "Arbeit macht frei," work makes you free. It was one of the most brutal lies in history. Trains would stop, doors would open, and on the ramp, a choice would be made, right or left. 6 million Jews lost their lives. Children, mothers, teachers, musicians, doctors, poets. Each one was a name, a voice, and a world, and each one was destroyed. In 1945, Allied forces reached the camps and were shocked by what they saw. Piles of bones, still warm ovens, living corpses, not dead, people too weak to speak, too exhausted to cry. But freedom was not liberation. For the survivors, the end of the war was the beginning of new suffering. There was no home to return to. There was no trace of their families. Before the war, more than 11 million people spoke Yiddish. Then, the voice of this language was almost completely silenced. The genocide had killed not only lives, but also memory. But the memories that had died blossomed again. Elie Wiesel wrote, Primo Levi wrote, Viktor Frankl penned Searching for the Meaning of Life from Inside a Camp, an answer to humanity's deepest question from the darkest place in humanity. Art spoke where the unspeakable was deemed unspeakable, and these voices could never be silenced again. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted some Nazi leaders. The concept of genocide gained a legal definition, but millions did not return, and the question still hangs in the air. Will this happen again? Those who perpetrated the Holocaust were not extraordinary monsters. The vast majority were ordinary people who returned to their families, went to church on weekends, and had children. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil. Hate doesn't always come with screams. Sometimes it comes gradually. Small restrictions, reasonable measures, discourses that otherize and declare a minority as other, the silence of the bystanders. And this silence makes one complicit in the crime. Hitler could not have done anything alone. Those who gave him what he needed were the indifferent, those who said, "This is not my problem," those who said, "Those people always cause problems anyway." And the vast majority of these people considered themselves good citizens. And even today, the good citizen syndrome continues. Is it normal for this silence to continue at a time when children, women, and innocent people are subjected to racism, driven from their homes, murdered, And when infants and young girls are sexually abused and then sacrificed and eaten in rituals, by adding hearts to the comments of this video and sharing it, you can share that evil is not an ordinary occurrence. Never again. 2 words. It's repeated in museums, monuments, and ceremonies, but is repetition enough? Never again means recognizing hate speech the first time it's heard. It means not remaining silent when the language of othering begins to normalize. It means recognizing the small steps through which history has arrived at this point. The Holocaust is not a historical document. It is a living warning. Now, my question to you is, what do you think drove a society to this kind of violence? Was it economic desperation, political manipulation, or something inherent in human nature? The answer to this question is not easy, and that's why it's important. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will pin the strongest comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.